I'm General Miranda Carter, 46, and I worked my way from a military kid with hospital corners to commanding troops in the field. For years, I showed up for my family, rides, money, respect, especially for my father, the retired staff sergeant I tried to impress. But when he leaned in before a community event and said, "You're nothing. Sit in the back," and moments later his old CO walked in, saluted, and said, "General Carter, ma'am, it's an honor. I made a different choice." Ever been dismissed or humiliated by someone you poured yourself into? Tell me in the comments. You're not alone. Before I dive in, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to draw a line and stand your ground, hit like and subscribe for more true stories about boundaries and self-respect. What happened next might surprise you. I grew up believing Reveille was just another alarm clock. In our house, Dad's military career wasn't history, it was religion. Every morning started with his stories from Fort Bragg, every dinner ended with lessons about discipline and chain of command. He'd polish his old jump boots while recounting the time his unit secured a hostile village in Afghanistan, or how his quick thinking saved 3 soldiers during a convoy ambush in Iraq. The walls of our living room were shrines to his service, framed commendations, unit photos, his Bronze Star displayed in a shadow box next to an American flag folded in perfect triangles. He wore his retired staff sergeant status like other men wore cologne, always present, impossible to ignore. When neighbors came by for barbecues, Dad would inevitably steer conversation toward his deployments, his voice carrying that particular weight of someone who'd seen things others couldn't understand. Leadership isn't taught in textbooks, he'd tell me, usually while demonstrating the proper way to fold a fitted sheet into military corners. It's forged under pressure, tested in real situations where people's lives depend on your decisions. I absorbed every word, memorized every story, tried to understand the man behind the uniform he still wore to Veterans Day ceremonies and Memorial Day parades. My mother moved through these moments with quiet support, never competing with his war stories, but always ensuring his medals stayed dust-free and his dress blues hung pressed in the closet. She understood something I was still learning, that Dad's identity had crystallized during those years overseas, and everything else, including us, existed in relation to that defining experience. I started running before dawn because Dad said soldiers needed cardiovascular endurance. I learned to strip and clean his old rifle because he believed everyone should understand weapons safety. When other kids complained about chores, I practiced hospital corners on my bed sheets and organized my closet according to military precision. Not because he demanded it, but because I wanted to speak his language, to earn the respect I saw him give his veteran friends when they gathered for poker nights or fishing trips. The discipline felt natural, almost comforting. While my classmates struggled with deadlines and organization, I thrived on structure and clear expectations. Teachers praised my leadership during group projects, my ability to stay calm under pressure during exams. I joined ROTC in high school, excelled in physical training, and found myself gravitating toward strategic thinking and tactical problems that reminded me of Dad's old field manuals. But somewhere in those formative years, a pattern emerged that I couldn't quite name. Dad would listen to my ROTC stories with polite attention, the same way he listened to Mom describe her book club meetings or my younger brother's soccer scores. His real enthusiasm was reserved for conversations with his Army buddies, men who could trade stories about forward operating bases and improvised explosive devices, who understood the weight of carrying 60 pounds of gear through desert heat. When I mentioned wanting to attend West Point, Dad nodded approvingly, but immediately launched into a comparison about how his basic training at Fort Benning had been more physically demanding than anything cadets experience nowadays. When I showed him my acceptance letter, he studied it briefly before commenting that the academy had lowered its standards since his era, trying to meet quotas and political expectations rather than producing real warriors. I told myself his skepticism was protective, that he wanted to prepare me for challenges ahead. Military fathers were supposed to be hard on their children, pushing them toward excellence through constructive criticism. The men he respected most had earned their positions through hardship and sacrifice, so perhaps his reluctance to celebrate my early achievements was simply his way of ensuring I remained humble and focused. But during those late teenage years, as my path toward military service became clearer, I began noticing how Dad's eyes would light up when discussing his own experiences while remaining notably dim when I shared mine. His stories grew longer and more detailed over time, as if he was polishing them for an audience that truly appreciated their significance. My stories seemed to shrink in comparison, becoming shorter summaries that felt somehow inadequate next to his battlefield narratives. The summer before I left for West Point, Dad organized a farewell gathering in our backyard. His veteran friends arrived with folding chairs and coolers full of beer, settling into familiar patterns of conversation that had nothing to do with my departure. I listened from the kitchen while helping Mom prepare burgers, hearing Dad describe my academy appointment as a good opportunity for her to see what real military service looks like, as if my next 4 years were an extended field trip rather than the beginning of my own career. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and we were cleaning up paper plates and empty bottles, Dad placed his hand on my shoulder with uncharacteristic gentleness. "The academy will challenge you in ways you can't imagine," he said quietly. "Just remember that your real education begins after graduation, when you're responsible for soldiers who depend on your judgment." I nodded, grateful for what felt like genuine advice, choosing to interpret his words as encouragement rather than warning. The night before I left for New York, I found Dad in the garage, organizing his old footlocker with methodical precision. He looked up when I entered, and for a moment, I saw something vulnerable in his expression, perhaps recognition that his daughter was about to embark on the same journey that had defined his identity for decades. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by his familiar mask of stoic professionalism. "Make us proud, soldier," he said, using a tone that was neither warm nor cold, simply matter-of-fact. I hugged him goodbye, breathing in the scent of gun oil and Old Spice that had always meant safety and strength in my childhood. As I walked toward the house to finish packing, I heard him return to organizing his gear, each piece placed exactly where it belonged, maintaining the order that had sustained him through decades of civilian life after war. Academy life began with the controlled chaos of Beast Barracks, where upperclassmen transformed civilians into soldiers through carefully orchestrated stress and exhaustion. I thrived in that environment, finding that Dad's informal training had prepared me better than most of my classmates for the physical demands and mental pressure of military indoctrination. My roommate struggled with homesickness and the constant scrutiny of cadet leadership, while I felt strangely at home in a world where excellence was measured in concrete terms and personal worth was determined by performance rather than potential. During those first months at West Point, I discovered that being Staff Sergeant Carter's daughter meant less than I had expected and more than I wanted to admit. My tactical officers respected my preparation and discipline, recognizing the foundation Dad's influence had provided, but they evaluated my performance based solely on my own capabilities and decisions. This was both liberating and terrifying. For the first time, my military identity existed independently of Dad's legacy, defined by my choices rather than his achievements. I wrote letters home describing the challenges of academic coursework, the intensity of military training, and my growing confidence in leadership positions. Dad's responses were brief and practical, offering advice about time management and study habits, but rarely commenting on my specific accomplishments. When I was selected for advanced leadership roles or recognized for academic excellence, his letters would acknowledge the news with the same tone he used to discuss weather forecasts or family gossip from neighbors. The contrast became sharper during holiday breaks, when I returned home wearing my cadet uniform and carrying stories of my own about challenging training exercises and complex tactical problems. Dad would listen politely, occasionally asking clarifying questions about academy policies or procedures, but his real interest remained focused on reconnecting with his veteran friends and sharing updates about their children's conventional civilian achievements, college graduations, new jobs, marriages, and grandchildren. Christmas dinner during my sophomore year crystallized this pattern in a way that was impossible to ignore. Dad's brother asked about my progress at the academy, and I began describing a recent field exercise where my squad had successfully completed a complex mission despite equipment failures and severe weather conditions. The story required tactical details and military terminology that demonstrated my growing expertise and confidence as a future officer. Halfway through my explanation, Dad interrupted with his own story about a similar situation his unit had faced in Afghanistan, where real bullets and actual enemy combatants had created stakes far more serious than any training scenario. His narrative consumed the rest of dinner conversation, relegating my academy experiences to what felt like children's games in comparison to his authentic combat operations. I finished my meal in silence, recognizing that Dad's interruption hadn't been malicious, but rather instinctive, a veteran's need to establish the hierarchy of experience that placed his wartime service above my peacetime preparation. Later that evening, as we washed dishes together, he asked if I was learning anything useful at the academy. His tone suggesting genuine curiosity, mixed with subtle skepticism about whether modern military education could match the lessons he'd absorbed through actual deployment and combat. My junior year brought increased responsibilities and recognition that I hoped might finally break through Dad's protective skepticism. I was selected for the Academy's most competitive leadership positions, earned academic honors in military strategy and international relations, and received commendations from tactical officers who saw potential for significant achievement in my future military career. Each accomplishment felt like evidence that I was worthy of the respect Dad reserved for proven soldiers, validation that my path toward officership deserved serious consideration rather than polite acknowledgement. But when I called home to share news of my selection as cadet company commander, Dad's response followed the familiar pattern of brief congratulations followed by immediate context about how his own military experience compared to mine. He reminded me that leading fellow cadets in a controlled environment was fundamentally different from commanding soldiers in combat situations where lives depended on split-second decisions under extreme pressure. Real leadership is tested when everything goes wrong, he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had been personally responsible for bringing soldiers home alive from hostile territory. The Academy teaches theory and procedure, but you won't understand command until you're responsible for men and women whose families depend on your judgment. I recognized the truth in his words while simultaneously feeling diminished by the implication that my achievements remained hypothetical rather than substantial. The summer between my junior and senior years, I completed internships with active duty units where I worked alongside officers who had deployed multiple times to Afghanistan and Iraq. These men and women treated me with professional respect, recognizing my potential while acknowledging that my real education as an officer would begin after graduation. Their attitude was encouraging rather than dismissive. They saw my academy training as solid preparation for the challenges ahead, not as inadequate simulation of real military service. When I returned home and shared stories from these internships, Dad listened with slightly more interest than usual, occasionally asking specific questions about the officers I had worked with or the units I had observed. For brief moments, I sensed that he might be beginning to see my military development as legitimate progression rather than extended childhood play. But these glimpses of recognition were always followed by subtle reminders that his own service had occurred during a more demanding era, when military standards were higher and soldiers faced more serious challenges. By my senior year at West Point, I had learned to moderate my expectations for Dad's approval while continuing to excel in my military development. My classmates elected me to leadership positions, my tactical officers recommended me for prestigious assignments after graduation, and visiting generals spoke favorably about my potential for advancement in the modern army. This recognition felt substantial and meaningful, even without Dad's enthusiastic endorsement. The week before graduation, Dad attended a briefing for families of soon-to-be commissioned officers. The presenter, a colonel who had commanded multiple combat units, described the caliber of leadership the Academy was producing and the critical roles these new officers would play in maintaining America's military readiness. After the presentation, Dad approached the colonel to introduce himself as a veteran and father of a graduating cadet. I watched from across the room as they spoke, noting Dad's respectful but familiar tone with someone he recognized as a peer in military experience. The colonel responded with equal respect, acknowledging Dad's service before commenting specifically about my performance and potential. "Your daughter has demonstrated exceptional leadership capabilities," he said, clearly enough for me to overhear. "She'll make an outstanding officer." Dad nodded appreciatively, accepting this professional assessment with more enthusiasm than he had shown for any of my previous achievements. Later that evening, as we walked around the academy grounds, Dad seemed more relaxed than I had seen him in years. He asked detailed questions about my post-graduation assignments and expressed genuine interest in my long-term career goals. For the first time, his questions felt motivated by curiosity about my future rather than skepticism about my preparation. The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours, longer than any military-focused discussion we had shared since my appointment to West Point 4 years earlier. Graduation day arrived with the ceremony and tradition befitting an institution that had produced generals and presidents. As I crossed the stage to receive my diploma and accept my commission as a second lieutenant, I saw Dad in the audience, standing at attention during the playing of the national anthem. His expression was serious and proud, acknowledging not just my individual achievement, but my entry into the profession that had defined his own identity and purpose. During the reception afterward, Dad introduced me to other veteran families as my daughter, the new Army officer, using a tone that conveyed respect rather than qualification. He seemed genuinely proud, though I recognized that his pride was still somewhat conditional, based more on my potential to become the kind of officer he respected than on appreciation for what I had already accomplished during my academy years. That evening, as we prepared to leave West Point forever, Dad handed me a small wrapped package. Inside was his Bronze Star Medal, the decoration he had earned for valor during combat operations in Iraq. "Every good officer needs to understand the weight of leadership," he said quietly. "This medal represents soldiers who came home because their leader made the right decisions under pressure. Someday, you'll face similar moments. Remember that command is a responsibility, not a privilege." I accepted the medal with appropriate solemnity, understanding that this gift represented Dad's most significant gesture of confidence in my military potential. But even as I appreciated the symbolism, I recognized that his respect remained contingent on future performance rather than current achievement. He was investing in the officer I might become, not celebrating the officer I had already proven myself to be. The months following graduation brought the intense training and increasing responsibilities of junior officer development. I excelled in my initial assignments, earning early recognition from commanders who appreciated my combination of academy preparation and natural leadership instincts. My soldiers responded well to my command style, which balanced Dad's emphasis on discipline with my own focus on professional development and mutual respect. When I called home to share news of early promotions and positive performance evaluations, Dad listened with interest, but continued to place my achievements in context of his own military experience. He would acknowledge my successes while immediately comparing them to similar milestones in his own career, always finding ways to suggest that his generation had faced more demanding standards or more challenging circumstances. This pattern persisted through my first deployment, where I led soldiers in actual combat operations that matched the seriousness Dad had always claimed was missing from my military experience. Even when I returned from overseas with combat decorations and commendations from senior officers, Dad's response followed familiar lines. Congratulations mixed with subtle reminders that his own deployments had been more dangerous or more significant in their strategic impact. But something was shifting in how others perceived my military career. Veteran organizations began inviting me to speak at events, recognizing my combination of combat experience and academy education as valuable perspective for younger service members. Military publications featured articles about my unit's successful operations, often highlighting my role in achieving mission objectives while maintaining high standards of soldier care and professional development. These external recognitions created an interesting dynamic during family gatherings, where Dad's veteran friends would ask specific questions about my deployments and command responsibilities. Their interest was professional and respectful, acknowledging my achievements as legitimate military accomplishments rather than preparatory exercises for future service. Dad would listen to these conversations with visible discomfort, clearly recognizing that his friends viewed my career with the same seriousness they reserved for his own military experience. The tension came to a head during my promotion to major, when Dad's response to the news was immediate skepticism about promotion timelines and standards in the modern military. He suggested that advancement came too quickly nowadays, implying that my promotion reflected lowered expectations rather than exceptional performance. This reaction felt particularly sharp because it dismissed not only my individual achievements, but also the judgment of senior officers who had evaluated my potential for increased responsibility. I decided that evening to stop seeking Dad's approval for my military career, recognizing that his need to maintain his own position as our family's primary military authority would always prevent him from fully celebrating my achievements. This wasn't abandonment or rebellion, simply acceptance that his respect would need to be earned through different channels than the ones I had been pursuing for nearly a decade. The decision brought unexpected relief and clarity. Instead of filtering my career choices through Dad's likely reactions, I began focusing entirely on the professional challenges and opportunities that aligned with my own interests and capabilities. My performance improved as I stopped second-guessing decisions based on how they might be received at home, and my confidence grew as I learned to trust my own judgment rather than seeking external validation. During the next family gathering, when relatives asked about my military service, I answered their questions directly without watching Dad's face for approval or disapproval. I described my current responsibilities and future assignments with the same straightforward professionalism I used when briefing senior officers, treating my career as a legitimate topic of adult conversation rather than a subject requiring paternal endorsement. Dad noticed the change immediately but seemed uncertain how to respond. His usual pattern of contextualizing my achievements with his own experiences felt forced and awkward when I didn't provide openings for comparison. Our conversations became more polite and distant, but also more honest. I was no longer performing for his approval, and he could no longer position himself as the ultimate authority on military service in my presence. This new dynamic created space for me to develop relationships with other veteran family members who appreciated my service on its own merits. Dad's brother, who had served in the Navy during Vietnam, began asking detailed questions about modern military operations and technology, genuinely interested in how warfare had evolved since his own service. These conversations were mutually respectful exchanges between veterans rather than competitions for authority or recognition. 6 months later, I received orders for command of a battalion, a significant promotion that would place me in charge of over 400 soldiers and multiple complex missions. The assignment came with recognition that I was being fast-tracked for senior leadership positions, identified as an officer with potential for eventual advancement to general officer ranks. This was the kind of achievement that couldn't be diminished through comparison or qualified with reminders about different standards in previous eras. When I called home to share the news, Dad's initial response was silence, the first time in years that he hadn't immediately placed my achievement in context of his own experience. After several seconds, he asked specific questions about the unit I would command and the missions I would be responsible for. His tone was serious and professional, acknowledging that my new position represented substantial authority and responsibility within the modern military structure. "Battalion command is significant," he said finally, his words carrying weight of genuine recognition rather than qualified praise. "Your soldiers will depend on your leadership in ways that test everything you've learned." For the first time since my academy appointment, Dad's response focused entirely on my future challenges and opportunities rather than comparisons with his past achievements. But even this moment of acknowledgement felt incomplete, respect for my position rather than celebration of the person who had earned it. I thanked him for his support and ended the conversation knowing that our relationship had evolved into something more honest, but also more distant than either of us had originally intended. The next phase of my career brought responsibilities and recognition that established my professional identity independently of Dad's military legacy. My battalion excelled under my command, achieving performance metrics that attracted attention from senior officers throughout our division. Military journalists interviewed me about innovative training methods and successful mission outcomes, treating me as a subject matter expert rather than simply an officer with potential. During this period, Dad's attitude toward my career underwent subtle but significant changes. He stopped offering unsolicited advice about military leadership, recognizing that my experience now matched or exceeded his own in terms of current relevance and scope of responsibility. His comments became more supportive and less comparative, acknowledging my achievements without immediately contextualizing them within his own service record. The transformation was gradual but unmistakable. When discussing my career with friends and family, Dad began using language that conveyed pride and respect rather than protective skepticism. He would describe my assignments and achievements using the same tone he reserved for discussing accomplished peers rather than children requiring guidance and correction. This shift created opportunities for more meaningful conversation between us about military service and leadership challenges. Dad would ask my opinion about current military policies and strategic decisions, treating my perspective as valuable professional input rather than academic theory. These discussions were collaborative rather than instructional, acknowledging that we both brought legitimate expertise to topics that had previously been dominated by his superior experience and authority. But the fundamental dynamic of our relationship remained complicated by years of accumulated disappointment and carefully managed expectations. I had learned to find validation and satisfaction through professional channels rather than family approval, while Dad seemed uncertain how to celebrate achievements that had surpassed his own career milestones. We had developed mutual respect, but lost the easy intimacy that might have made that respect more emotionally satisfying. The situation crystallized during a community event where Dad had been invited to speak about veteran experiences to a local high school audience. The organizers asked him to bring family members who could share perspectives about military service and its impact on families. Dad invited me to participate, acknowledging that my active duty status and recent combat experience would provide valuable insight for students considering military careers. During the presentation, Dad spoke eloquently about his own service and the values that military experience had instilled in his approach to civilian life. When he introduced me to the audience, his words were respectful and proud, describing my academy education, combat deployments, and current command responsibilities with obvious satisfaction. For the first time in memory, he presented my military career as an achievement worthy of admiration rather than a work in progress requiring future validation. The students asked thoughtful questions about modern military service, leadership challenges, and the differences between Dad's generation of soldiers and mine. We answered their questions as partners rather than senior and junior officers, each contributing perspectives that complemented rather than competed with each other. The experience felt like a preview of the relationship we might develop if we could move beyond the dynamics that had defined our interactions for so many years. After the presentation, Dad suggested we continue our conversation over dinner at a restaurant near the school. During the meal, he asked detailed questions about my current command responsibilities and future career goals, displaying genuine interest in my professional development for the first time since my academy appointment. His questions were specific and informed, demonstrating that he had been following my career more closely than his previous responses had indicated. "I may not have always shown it appropriately," he said as we finished eating, "but I've always been proud of your service. Watching you develop into the kind of officer I wished I could have been has been one of the most significant experiences of my life as a father." His words were measured and sincere, acknowledging both his previous failures and his current recognition of my achievements. I appreciated his honesty while recognizing that this conversation represented progress rather than resolution. Years of seeking validation that had been withheld couldn't be immediately healed through a single evening of recognition and respect. But Dad's acknowledgement felt like the beginning of a more honest relationship, one based on mutual recognition rather than competition for authority or approval. The following months brought opportunities to build on this foundation through shared professional interests and complementary perspectives on military service. Dad began asking my opinion about veteran affairs issues and current military policies, treating my insights as valuable contributions to topics we both cared about deeply. These conversations were collaborative and respectful, acknowledging that we brought different but equally legitimate expertise to subjects that had previously been sources of tension between us. My promotion to lieutenant colonel arrived 6 months ahead of the normal timeline, accompanied by selection for assignment to the Pentagon in a position that would place me among the most influential officers of my generation. The promotion came with recognition that I was being considered for eventual advancement to general officer ranks, a level of achievement that would definitively establish my military career as substantial and significant rather than merely promising. When I called to share this news, Dad's response was immediate and unqualified congratulations. He asked specific questions about my new responsibilities and the strategic importance of my assignment, treating the promotion as recognition of exceptional achievement rather than simply the next logical step in a typical career progression. His enthusiasm was genuine and complete, unmarred by the comparative context that had characterized his previous responses to my professional milestones. "This is the kind of assignment that shapes military policy," he said with obvious pride. "Your influence will extend far beyond your immediate command to affect how the entire Army approaches its mission." His recognition felt complete and satisfying, acknowledging both my individual achievement and its broader significance within the military institution we both served. For the first time since beginning my military career, I felt that Dad and I were positioned as peers rather than senior and junior members of the same profession. His respect was based on my demonstrated capabilities rather than potential for future development, and my appreciation for his guidance was voluntary rather than dependent on his approval. We had achieved a foundation for relationship that honored both his legacy of service and my independent achievements. But even this progress felt fragile and incomplete, built on professional recognition rather than personal understanding. Dad's pride in my military career was authentic, but focused primarily on achievements that reflected well on his influence and guidance rather than celebrating the person who had earned them. I valued his respect while recognizing that our relationship remained defined by military service in ways that limited its emotional depth and personal intimacy. The limitations of this professional bond became apparent during family gatherings where conversation inevitably returned to military topics as the primary common ground between us. Other family members would listen politely as Dad and I discussed strategic policies and leadership challenges, but these conversations excluded rather than included the people we both cared about most. Our relationship had become more respectful, but also more isolated from the broader family context that should have provided its foundation. I began to recognize that healing the deeper wounds in our relationship would require addressing the personal rather than professional dimensions of Dad's previous dismissal and my accumulated disappointment. Military achievement could earn his respect, but it couldn't restore the trust and intimacy that had been damaged by years of seeking validation that had been consistently withheld. We needed to acknowledge the emotional cost of our previous dynamic rather than simply celebrating its professional resolution. The opportunity for this deeper conversation came during a family crisis that required both of us to set aside our military identities and focus on personal relationships and family obligations. Dad's handling of the situation demonstrated the leadership qualities and personal strength that had originally inspired my respect for him, while my response showed the maturity and judgment that his guidance had helped develop. Working together on family rather than military challenges allowed us to recognize each other as complete people rather than simply professional colleagues. During a quiet moment in the middle of this crisis, Dad acknowledged that his previous responses to my military career had been influenced by his own insecurity about remaining relevant as a veteran in an era when his experience was becoming increasingly dated. He had used comparative context and skeptical responses to maintain his position as the family's military authority, not recognizing how this dynamic had undermined my confidence and damaged our relationship. "I was protecting something that didn't need protection," he admitted. "Your success never diminished my service, but I acted as if it did. I'm sorry for the ways I failed to support you when you needed encouragement rather than criticism." His apology was specific and complete, acknowledging both his motivations and their impact on my development and our relationship. I accepted his apology while sharing my own perspective on how his responses had affected my approach to military service and family relationships. We spent several hours discussing not just the professional aspects of our military careers, but the personal costs and benefits of service that had shaped both our individual identities and our relationship with each other. This conversation felt like the beginning of a more complete relationship, one that honored both our military connection and our family bond. The family crisis eventually resolved, but the understanding Dad and I had developed during that difficult period provided a foundation for ongoing relationship improvement. We began spending time together on non-military activities, discovering shared interests and compatible perspectives that had been overshadowed by our professional focus. These experiences allowed us to appreciate each other as complete people rather than simply as military officers with complementary career experiences. My next promotion to colonel was accompanied by assignment to command a brigade, a position that would place me among the most senior combat leaders in the Army and establish my credentials for eventual advancement to general officer ranks. This achievement represented not just personal success, but validation of the leadership potential Dad had always claimed to see in my military development, even when his responses had suggested skepticism rather than confidence. When I shared this news, Dad's reaction was celebration rather than simply recognition. He expressed genuine excitement about my assignment and its implications for both my immediate responsibilities and long-term career prospects. His response focused entirely on my achievement and its significance rather than making any comparisons with his own service or suggesting qualifications about modern military standards. "This is exactly the kind of leadership position the Army needs," he said with unmistakable pride. "Your soldiers are fortunate to have a commander with your combination of experience and judgment." His words conveyed complete confidence in my capabilities and wholehearted support for my continued advancement, the kind of encouragement I had hoped to receive throughout my military development, but had learned to find through other sources. The promotion ceremony was held at our home base, with family members invited to attend the formal change of command that would mark my assumption of brigade leadership. Dad wore his dress uniform to the ceremony, looking distinguished and proud as he watched me accept responsibility for over 3,000 soldiers and multiple complex missions. During the reception afterward, I observed him speaking with my new superior officers, discussing my qualifications and potential with obvious satisfaction and respect. Later that evening, as we reflected on the ceremony and its significance, Dad shared his perspective on watching me assume command of a unit larger and more complex than any he had ever led during his own military career. Rather than feeling diminished by my advancement beyond his own achievements, he expressed satisfaction that his influence had contributed to developing an officer capable of such significant responsibility and leadership. "Seeing you take command today reminded me why I was proud to serve," he said thoughtfully. "Military service is about developing the next generation of leaders who can carry forward the values and standards that make our profession meaningful. You represent the best of what that development can achieve." His words conveyed not just personal pride, but professional satisfaction that his military legacy would continue through my service and leadership. This moment felt like the complete resolution of tensions that had defined our relationship for over a decade. Dad's pride was personal rather than comparative, focused on my individual achievement rather than its reflection on his own service. My appreciation for his support was genuine rather than grudging, acknowledging the foundation his guidance had provided while claiming ownership of the success I had earned through my own efforts and decisions. But even as we celebrated this milestone, I recognized that our relationship had been permanently shaped by the years of tension and misunderstanding that had preceded this resolution. We had achieved mutual respect and genuine affection, but we had also lost opportunities for deeper intimacy and trust that might have developed if Dad had been more supportive during my early career development. Our current relationship was satisfying, but also limited by the caution and independence I had learned during years of managing disappointment and seeking validation elsewhere. The final test of our relationship came 18 months later, when I received notification of my selection for promotion to Brigadier General. the achievement that would definitively establish my military career as exceptional rather than simply successful. This promotion was particularly significant because it represented recognition not just of my individual capabilities, but of my potential to influence military policy and strategic decision-making at the highest levels of Army leadership. General officer promotion requires Senate confirmation and extensive background investigation, making it a public acknowledgement of professional achievement that extends far beyond internal military recognition. The announcement would be published in military publications and local newspapers, establishing my advancement as a matter of public record and community pride rather than simply family celebration. When I called to share this news, Dad's response was silence, not the skeptical silence that had characterized his early responses to my achievements, but the overwhelmed silence of someone processing information that exceeded his expectations and understanding. After several seconds, he asked me to repeat what I had said, as if he needed confirmation that he had heard correctly. "Brigadier General," he said slowly, testing the words and their implications. "My daughter is going to be a general officer." His voice carried amazement and pride in equal measure, acknowledging that my achievement had surpassed not just his own military career, but his imagination of what might be possible for his child to accomplish. The conversation that followed was unlike any we had shared since I first announced my intention to attend West Point over 15 years earlier. Dad asked detailed questions about the responsibilities I would assume and the strategic challenges I would face, treating me as someone whose judgment and expertise he respected rather than someone whose potential he was still evaluating. His interest was professional and personal, acknowledging both the significance of my achievement and his satisfaction in witnessing my success. "I always knew you had the potential for leadership," he said toward the end of our conversation, "but I don't think I understood the scope of what that potential might become. Watching you develop into the kind of officer who earns this level of recognition has been one of the most profound experiences of my life." His words were thoughtful and sincere, acknowledging both his pride and his recognition that my achievement had exceeded his expectations and understanding. The promotion ceremony was scheduled for several weeks later, with family members and friends invited to witness the formal pinning of my new rank and assumption of general officer responsibilities. Dad immediately began making arrangements to attend, treating the event as the most significant family celebration in recent memory. His enthusiasm was infectious, spreading to other family members who began planning their own attendance at what they recognized as a historic moment in our family's military legacy. During the weeks leading up to the ceremony, Dad spent considerable time researching the responsibilities and significance of general officer rank, educating himself about the strategic challenges and policy influence I would assume in my new position. His research was thorough and respectful, acknowledging that my new responsibilities would extend far beyond his own military experience and expertise. The ceremony itself was formal and impressive, conducted with the dignity and tradition befitting the promotion of a new general officer. Dad wore his dress uniform with obvious pride, standing at attention during the playing of the national anthem and the formal presentation of my new rank insignia. His expression throughout the ceremony was serious and proud, acknowledging the significance of the moment while maintaining the military bearing that had defined his own approach to formal occasions. During the reception afterward, I observed Dad speaking with senior officers who had attended the ceremony, discussing my qualifications and potential with the confidence of someone whose assessment was respected and valued. These conversations were between military peers rather than between a veteran seeking recognition and active-duty officers providing polite acknowledgement. Dad's participation was welcomed and meaningful, contributing to rather than detracting from the celebration of my achievement. Later that evening, as we spent quiet time together reflecting on the day's events, Dad presented me with a gift that surprised me with its thoughtfulness and significance. He had located and purchased a first-edition copy of a military leadership manual that had influenced his own development as a young soldier, inscribed with a personal message acknowledging my achievement and expressing his confidence in my future success as a general officer. This book shaped my understanding of military leadership when I was learning to be a soldier, he explained as I examined the carefully preserved volume. "I hope it provides some useful perspective as you assume responsibilities that go far beyond anything I ever experienced. Your leadership will influence not just your immediate command, but the future direction of our entire military institution." His gift represented more than personal recognition. It was acknowledgement that my military career had achieved significance that matched and exceeded his own service, worthy of the same respect and attention he had always reserved for accomplished military leaders. The inscription he had written was personal and professional, celebrating both my individual achievement and its broader meaning for military service and family legacy. As I prepared to leave for my new assignment the following week, Dad and I spent time together that felt different from any previous conversations about my military career. Instead of discussing my potential or comparing my experiences with his own, we talked as military professionals who shared common values and complementary perspectives on service and leadership. Our conversation was collaborative and respectful, acknowledging that we both brought legitimate expertise to topics that had previously been sources of tension between us. The night before my departure, Dad asked if we could spend some private time together to discuss not just my new responsibilities, but our relationship and its evolution over the years since I first announced my intention to pursue military service. His request was serious and thoughtful, indicating that he recognized the significance of this transition not just for my career, but for our ongoing relationship as father and daughter. During this conversation, Dad acknowledged the ways his responses to my military development had been shaped by his own insecurity and need to maintain his position as our family's primary military authority. He recognized that his comparative context and skeptical responses had undermined my confidence and damaged our relationship, even when his intentions had been protective rather than competitive. "I spent so many years trying to prepare you for challenges that I failed to celebrate your successes," he said quietly. "I was so focused on protecting my own relevance that I couldn't see how my responses were affecting you. I'm sorry for the ways I failed to support you when encouragement would have been more valuable than criticism." I accepted his apology while sharing my own perspective on how our dynamic had shaped my approach to military service and family relationships. We discussed not just the professional aspects of our military careers, but the personal costs and benefits of service that had influenced both our individual identities and our connection to each other. This conversation felt healing in ways that years of professional recognition had not achieved. The following morning, as I prepared to leave for my new assignment, Dad walked me to my car with the formal bearing he had maintained throughout my military career. But when we reached the driveway, he broke from his usual reserved demeanor to embrace me with genuine warmth and affection. "I'm proud of the officer you've become," he said simply. "More than that, I'm proud of the person you are." His words carried weight that went beyond professional recognition, acknowledging not just my military achievements, but my character and integrity as someone he respected completely. This felt like the validation I had sought throughout my career, offered freely rather than earned through accumulated accomplishments. Our relationship had evolved from competition to collaboration to genuine mutual respect and affection. 3 months into my new assignment, Dad called with news that surprised me with its significance for our ongoing relationship. The local Veterans of Foreign Wars chapter had asked him to organize a ceremony honoring military families, specifically recognizing the contributions and sacrifices of family members who supported active duty service members throughout their careers. "I'd like you to be the keynote speaker," he said, his request carrying obvious pride and respect. "Your perspective as someone who grew up in a military family and then chose military service yourself would be valuable for families trying to understand how to support their service members effectively." I accepted his invitation, recognizing the opportunity to contribute to a community that had shaped both our lives and to share insights that might help other military families navigate the challenges we had experienced. The speaking engagement felt like collaboration rather than performance, acknowledging that both Dad and I had legitimate perspectives to offer on military service and family relationships. The ceremony was held at the local American Legion post, with several hundred attendees representing multiple generations of military families from our community. Dad introduced me to the audience with obvious pride, describing my military career and achievements without qualification or comparison. His introduction focused entirely on my accomplishments and their significance rather than placing them in context of his own service. During my presentation, I spoke honestly about the challenges military families face when balancing professional demands with personal relationships, drawing on both my experience as a military child and my perspective as an active duty officer. I acknowledged the difficulties Dad and I had navigated while emphasizing the strength and resilience that military families develop through shared commitment to service and sacrifice. The audience responded positively to my message, asking thoughtful questions about maintaining family connections during deployments and supporting military children who choose to pursue their own service careers. Dad participated in the question and answer session as an equal partner, contributing insights from his experience while acknowledging my expertise on topics related to modern military service and contemporary leadership challenges. After the ceremony, several attendees approached us to continue conversations about military family dynamics and the unique challenges faced by multi-generational military families. These discussions were collaborative rather than hierarchical, with Dad and I contributing complementary perspectives that enhanced rather than competed with each other's insights. The drive home that evening provided opportunity for reflection on how far our relationship had progressed since the early years of my military career. Dad expressed satisfaction with the ceremony and appreciation for my willingness to participate in community events that honored military service and family sacrifice. His gratitude was personal and professional, acknowledging both my contribution to the community and my role in representing our family's military legacy. "Tonight reminded me why I've always been proud of your service," he said as we pulled into our driveway. "Not just because of what you've achieved professionally, but because of how you've used your experience to help other people understand the value and meaning of military service." His words conveyed complete acceptance and respect, focusing on my character rather than my accomplishments. This moment felt like the final resolution of tensions that had defined our relationship for so many years. Dad's pride was unconditional rather than comparative, celebrating my contributions without reference to his own achievements or limitations. My appreciation for his support was genuine rather than grudging, acknowledging the foundation his guidance had provided while maintaining ownership of the success I had earned through independent effort and decision-making. 6 months later, the culmination of our transformed relationship occurred during a community event that neither of us had anticipated or planned. The local Chamber of Commerce had organized a reception honoring distinguished community members, with Dad invited as a respected veteran and business leader who had contributed significantly to local civic organizations and charitable activities. I was visiting home during a brief leave from my Pentagon assignment when Dad asked if I would accompany him to the reception. His invitation was casual rather than formal, treating my attendance as family support rather than professional obligation. I agreed to attend, looking forward to a social event that would allow us to spend relaxed time together without the intensity that had often characterized our previous interactions. The reception was held at the community center, with approximately 200 attendees representing local business leaders, civic organizations, and veteran groups. Dad moved through the crowd with comfortable familiarity, greeting friends and acquaintances while introducing me as his daughter rather than emphasizing my military rank or position. This subtle change felt significant, acknowledging our family relationship as primary rather than our shared professional connection. During the evening's program, the Chamber President recognized several community members for their contributions to local organizations and charitable causes. Dad was acknowledged for his work with veteran services and youth mentorship programs, receiving applause that reflected genuine respect and appreciation from people whose lives he had influenced through decades of quiet service. As the formal program concluded and attendees returned to social conversation, I noticed an elderly gentleman in a military dress uniform approaching our table with purposeful determination. His bearing and decorations indicated senior military rank, though I didn't immediately recognize him or understand his interest in our conversation. "Excuse me," he said, addressing Dad with formal military courtesy. Are you Staff Sergeant Carter, formerly of the 82nd Airborne Division? Dad confirmed his identity, clearly surprised to encounter someone from his military past at a local community event. The gentleman smiled with obvious satisfaction before turning his attention to me. And you must be his daughter, he continued, his tone becoming more formal as he studied my civilian attire with professional assessment. I've been following your career with great interest, General Carter. His use of my rank created immediate attention from nearby attendees, who turned toward our conversation with obvious curiosity about the military discussion taking place in their midst. I confirmed my identity while trying to understand how this gentleman knew about my military service and why he had sought us out at a civilian community event. His next words provided context that transformed not just our conversation, but the entire evening's significance for Dad and me. I'm Colonel Jefferson, retired. I had the privilege of serving as your father's commanding officer during his deployment to Iraq in 2004. He turned back toward Dad with obvious respect and satisfaction. Staff Sergeant Carter was one of the finest soldiers I commanded during 30 years of active duty service. His leadership and judgment saved lives during some of our most challenging operations. Dad's expression reflected surprise and appreciation at this unexpected recognition from a former commander he obviously respected. Colonel Jefferson continued his comments with specific details about Dad's performance and contributions that demonstrated genuine knowledge and sincere appreciation for his service and character. But tonight, I'm not here to discuss the past, Colonel Jefferson said, returning his attention to me. I'm here because I wanted the opportunity to meet the general officer who has earned recognition as one of the most promising strategic leaders in the current Army. Your reputation for innovation and excellence has reached even retired officers who maintain interest in military development. His words carried professional weight that elevated our casual social evening into something more significant and meaningful. Other attendees began gathering closer to our conversation, recognizing that they were witnessing a moment of military recognition that transcended typical community social interactions. General Carter, Colonel Jefferson continued, his voice carrying formal military authority that commanded attention throughout the reception area. It would be my honor to render the appropriate recognition for your achievement and service. He stepped back slightly and came to attention with the precise bearing that reflected decades of military discipline and tradition. The room fell silent as Colonel Jefferson rendered a perfect military salute, his voice clear and strong as he announced, General Carter, ma'am, it's an honor to meet you. Your service and leadership represent the finest traditions of military excellence. Every person in the room turned toward our table, witnessing this moment of formal military recognition in a setting none of us had anticipated. I returned Colonel Jefferson's salute with appropriate military bearing, acknowledging his recognition while remaining conscious of the civilian audience observing our exchange. The moment felt surreal, receiving formal military honors at a community social event while Dad watched from beside me, seeing his daughter recognized with the respect reserved for senior military leaders. The silence that followed lasted several seconds before the room erupted in applause from attendees who understood they had witnessed something significant even if they couldn't fully comprehend its military implications. Dad's expression reflected amazement and pride in equal measure, seeing his daughter receive recognition from a former commander whose opinion he valued and respected. Colonel Jefferson remained at attention until the applause subsided, then relaxed his posture while maintaining the respectful demeanor appropriate for addressing a general officer. Your father should be extraordinarily proud, he said, speaking loudly enough for nearby attendees to hear clearly. His influence obviously contributed to developing the kind of leader our military needs at the highest levels of command. Dad's jaw had dropped during Colonel Jefferson's formal recognition, his expression reflecting complete surprise at witnessing his daughter receive military honors that exceeded anything he had experienced during his own career. The moment represented validation not just of my achievements, but of the military values and standards he had instilled throughout my development, acknowledged by someone whose opinion carried unquestioned authority and respect. Thank you, Colonel, I responded with appropriate formality. My father's influence was indeed significant in my military development. His example of service and sacrifice provided the foundation for whatever success I've been able to achieve. My words were sincere rather than diplomatic, acknowledging Dad's contribution while accepting recognition for my own accomplishments. The remainder of the evening was transformed by Colonel Jefferson's recognition and its impact on both the attendees and our family dynamic. Dad moved through subsequent conversations with obvious pride and satisfaction, no longer introducing me simply as his daughter, but as my daughter, General Carter, using a tone that conveyed complete respect and admiration rather than qualification or context. Local community members approached throughout the evening to express their appreciation for military service and their amazement at witnessing such formal recognition in their civilian social setting. These conversations were respectful and genuine, treating both Dad and me as honored guests whose military experience had added significance to their community event. The drive home provided opportunity for Dad and me to process what had occurred and its significance for our relationship and individual perspectives. Dad expressed amazement at Colonel Jefferson's recognition and gratitude for the validation it provided regarding his own military service and influence on my development. "I never imagined anything like that would happen," he said thoughtfully. "Seeing you receive that kind of recognition from Colonel Jefferson made me understand for the first time the full scope of what your military career has become." His words reflected genuine, or rather than competitive comparison, acknowledging my achievement as something that exceeded his expectations and understanding. I shared my own perspective on the evening's significance, emphasizing how meaningful it had been to receive recognition in Dad's presence and to have Colonel Jefferson acknowledge the foundation Dad's guidance had provided for my military development. This felt like the completion of a journey that had begun with my childhood absorption of his military values and evolved through years of tension and misunderstanding to arrive at mutual respect and genuine pride. "Tonight felt like vindication for both of us," I said as we pulled into our driveway. "Your influence was acknowledged by someone whose opinion carries real weight, and my achievement was recognized in a way that honored rather than diminished your own service." Dad nodded in agreement, clearly moved by the evening's events and their implications for our ongoing relationship. The following months brought continued opportunities to build on the foundation that evening had established. Dad began sharing stories about my military career with the same pride and enthusiasm he had always reserved for his own service experiences. His conversations with veteran friends now included updates about my assignments and achievements, treating my career as a source of family pride rather than potential competition with his own legacy. I made efforts to include Dad in professional activities where his experience and perspective would be valued and appropriate. Military ceremonies and community events provided opportunities for us to represent our family's multi-generational military service, acknowledging both his foundational influence and my contemporary contributions to ongoing military excellence. Our relationship evolved into something neither of us had originally envisioned, but both of us valued deeply. The tension and competition that had characterized our early interactions had been replaced by mutual respect and genuine affection based on shared values and complementary experiences. Dad's pride in my achievements was complete and unconditional, while my appreciation for his influence was voluntary rather than grudging. The final validation of our transformed relationship came during my promotion to Major General 2 years later, when Dad was invited to participate in the pinning ceremony that would mark my advancement to the senior ranks of military leadership. His presence at this milestone felt appropriate rather than obligatory, acknowledging his role in my development while celebrating my independent achievement. As he helped pin my new rank insignia during the formal ceremony, Dad's expression reflected complete satisfaction and pride. His participation was meaningful rather than symbolic, acknowledging that his influence had contributed to developing an officer worthy of such recognition and responsibility. The moment felt like the culmination of our journey from competition to collaboration to genuine mutual respect and affection. Later that evening, during the private family celebration that followed the formal ceremony, Dad raised a toast that surprised me with its eloquence and emotional depth. "To my daughter, whose service and leadership have exceeded every expectation and brought honor to our family's military legacy," he said, his voice carrying genuine pride and satisfaction, and to the recognition that true leadership creates more leaders rather than diminishing others. His words acknowledged not just my individual achievement, but the evolution of our relationship and his understanding of how genuine support and recognition could enhance rather than threaten his own legacy and identity. We had learned to celebrate each other's accomplishments rather than competing for recognition or authority, creating space for both of us to take pride in military service that honored shared values while acknowledging individual contributions. As I reflected on our journey that evening, I recognized that Dad and I had achieved something rare and valuable, a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine affection that honored both our shared military connection and our individual identities. The path had been complicated and sometimes painful, but it had ultimately led us to understanding and appreciation that felt authentic and sustainable. The transformation was complete. Dad's dismissive words from years earlier, "You're nothing. Just sit in the back," had been replaced by genuine recognition and unconditional support. My own journey from seeking his approval to finding independent validation had evolved into voluntary appreciation for his influence and genuine enjoyment of his pride in my achievements. We had learned that true respect cannot be demanded or withheld based on comparison or competition. Instead, it must be earned through individual achievement and offered through recognition of others' accomplishments and potential. Our relationship now reflected these principles, creating space for both of us to take satisfaction in military service that honored our shared values while celebrating our individual contributions to something larger than ourselves. The evening concluded with quiet conversation between us about future challenges and opportunities, discussing my new responsibilities and his ongoing community involvement with the collaborative respect that had replaced our previous competitive dynamic. We were no longer father and daughter seeking validation from each other, but military professionals who shared common values and complementary perspectives on service and leadership. This felt like the resolution I had sought throughout my military career, not triumph over Dad's previous dismissal, but transformation of our relationship into something based on mutual recognition and genuine affection. We had both grown through the process, learning to appreciate each other's contributions while maintaining our individual identities and accomplishments. As I prepared to assume my new responsibilities as a Major General, I carried with me not just the professional preparation my military career had provided, but the personal satisfaction of having achieved authentic relationship with the man whose influence had shaped my understanding of service and leadership. Dad's recognition was complete and unconditional, while my appreciation for his guidance was voluntary rather than dependent on his approval. The journey from "You're nothing" to "General Carter, ma'am" had been long and sometimes difficult, but it had ultimately led us to understanding and respect that felt genuine and lasting. We had learned to honor both our shared military legacy and our individual contributions, creating space for celebration rather than competition, recognition rather than dismissal, and genuine pride rather than qualified acknowledgement. Standing in my dress uniform that evening, surrounded by family and friends who had witnessed our transformation, I understood that true victory was not about proving Dad wrong or achieving recognition that exceeded his accomplishments. Instead, it was about creating relationship based on mutual respect and genuine affection, honoring both his influence and my independent achievement while celebrating the values we shared and the legacy we would continue together. Thanks for sticking with me through this story. Have you ever had someone you cared about dismiss your worth, only for life to prove them wrong? How did you handle it? Did you confront them, set boundaries, or just let your success speak for itself? Share your experience in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And if this story resonated, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more true stories about standing tall when others try to cut you down.